Namaste, Hari Om everyone. We are here with yet another virtual session. Today we are very delighted to have a speaker from the New Zealand, and we are going to give a small introduction about our today's speaker. Swami Karma Karuna Saraswati is an engaging intuitive yoga and meditative teacher, inspirational speaker, and IAYT Integrated Yoga Approach Therapist certified with 30 years of experience in the yoga field, including significant training in India and including ongoing visits and guidance with different schools of yoga, especially the Bihar School of Yoga. She is also certified by Yoga Alliance as an education provider and a senior teacher of yoga in the Australia and the New Zealand. She has completed her Bachelor's of Arts in Interpersonal Communication with a minor in psychology, determined an early interest in working with groups and individuals. She is passionate about sharing an authentic and down-to-earth approach, weaving towards ancient practices with a touch of psychology and brain science or the neuroscience aimed at motivation people to like their yoga and now. She has given several guided meditative practices, including Hatha Yoga classes, Yoga Nidra, meditative techniques, and available through Anahata Yoga Retreat website and articles on a variety of subjects. And you can read through the Australia Yoga Life magazine. And there are so many other works is given and completed by her. So with this small and smart introduction, I just welcome you on our platform. Thank you so much to give a small time for all the students who are going to watch this. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste, Hari Om. It's an honor to be here for this wonderful program, Own Your Own Growth. And I look forward today to sharing a little bit of insight on Patanjali's 8-limbed path, Ashtanga yoga, and how this relates to yoga therapy. And so we'll be moving through that, and I'll start a slideshow in a moment. But before we do so, I'd like to invite you to take a few moments to settle into your position wherever you are. If you can be seated, this is helpful, or even if you're standing, then pause for a moment and place your feet on the earth and or your buttocks connected to the surface beneath you. And take this moment to find a sense of balance and grounding in your position so that you can hold it for a few moments. Hands in a gesture or mudra of your choice. And feel that sense of coming a little bit closer to yourself as the eyes close, the body becomes stable and still. Notice for a few moments the position, the shape of the body. And how there's a gradual shift in experience as we come into a still and more balanced physical position. Noticing any places that might be holding, tense, open, balanced, imbalanced. Gradually tune your awareness to the rhythm of your breath without altering it in any way. Become present with it. Is it deep or shallow? Rhythmic or arrhythmic? More placed in the abdomen, the chest. Have a sense that the breath is a thread to draw the awareness in. Notice also the mental state. Is the mind busy, quiet, distracted into external experiences, lost in a thought or a mind loop? aim to be the observer to whatever is arising. And then draw the focus to the point between the eyebrows, called Brumadhya, and hold there the luminous symbol of a flame, a steady flame, the universal symbol. And we'll begin by chanting the mantra Om 3 times. Taking a breath in. Om. 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. As you're ready, feel free to gradually begin to reconnect into your sense world. And I'll be sharing with you my slideshow. So as you're ready, you can feel free to open your eyes. And I'll refer back to that little experience, but the aim is to touch into the different layers briefly of who we are as a prelude to understanding the philosophy of Ashtanga yoga and yoga therapy and the types of stages we go through as we go from the external aspect of yogic practice and how it applies to therapeutic applications and more into the internal experience. So I'd like to just honor my teachers from the Bihar School of Yoga, particularly Swami Niranjanananda and Swami Satya Sangananda. I'd like to begin with this idea that one of the most challenging things that we're all facing in this day and age is stress. And it comes in different forms from the outside, from experiences like this pandemic we've gone through, from overstimulation. So for example, much of our lives we're having so much stimulation, so much coming in through the senses, which has an influence. It's a constant stimulation which creates these nervous impulses, and it uses our vital energy, our prana, and it also triggers aspects of memory and association. So whilst it might be that the environment, the external environment, is where some of the input is coming from, we are influenced at the different levels of being. And this is important as a background to understand how we could approach ourselves through this eight-limbed path of Patanjali's Ashtanga yoga. One of the aspects that's also important to understand is the intended stress response is supposed to be short-lived. So in times of past, when we had a lion chasing us, or we had to fight an attacking tribe, something like that, it was an intensity of stress for usually a shorter term period. And once that stress was completed, or we won the fight, we won the battle with the lion, then we would go into relaxation state and re-nourish ourselves and come back to our balance. And unfortunately, in this day and age, many of us are in this chronic stress state, and that's a lot of what causes the seeds. And I'm just bringing this to our attention to start off with, because so much of the imbalance in life is really around these roots of stress, whether it's coming from the external or it's coming from internal patterning that influences us at a physical level, a mental level, emotional level, energetic, and therefore creates an imbalance in so many layers of our experience. And knowing this will help us in a way work through these steps of Ashtanga yoga. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, one of the key yogic sayings, which many will already know, is this Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And that translates as yoga is about relating to finding tranquility or coming beyond the disturbances, the vrittis, the thoughts, the chitta, and finding that ability to find balance, tranquility, or manage, control the thoughts. And so much of what we both the roots of our imbalances from a yoga therapy point of view, as well as the way out, is by learning how to manage our thoughts and find more tranquility or balance in life. The 8-limbed path of Patanjali is wonderfully set out, and we begin with the yamas and niyamas, gradually moving from the external experience of yoga into the asana, pranayama, the position, the pose, the seat, which is in original times held for a long period of time. Pranayama, relating to our breath and our vital energy body. Pratyahara, our ability to actually disconnect from all that sense input, which leads us into focus or our ability to concentrate. And that gradually leads us to the state of meditation. And we can practice meditation, but the actual state of meditation is a spontaneous experience, which, when sustained over a long period of time, brings us into the final state of samadhi, or the state of oneness. And of course, the whole yogic path is leading us towards this, but we have to deal with who we are and all the layers of experience. We begin also by understanding that there's 5 layers from a classical point of view, the 5 layers of experience. And all of what I'm sharing with you right now is a base, but we can't think of yoga therapy just from one layer, because everything's interconnected. So we have the Annamaya Kosha, the physical body, the Pranamaya Kosha, the energy body, the vital body, Manomaya Kosha, the mental body, Vijnanamaya Kosha, intuitive, and Anandamaya Kosha, bliss body. The main thing I want you to understand here is, as we both work through the Ashtanga, the 8-limbed path, as well as we work through the layers of who we are, from the physical to the more subtle aspects, we are dealing with different layers, interconnected layers of who we are. So we can't just, for example, approach yoga therapy from a physical point of view. If we don't deal with the root that's beneath that, then often we can end up recreating that physical imbalance, or vice versa. If we don't deal with that mental root, then it continues to influence the physical and energetic body, for example. You can also look at it from this point of view, that we have this sensory awareness. So we've just been speaking about that external sensory awareness. We have that also is connected to the physical awareness, the breath. And as we go in, as we kind of keep on going into these subtle layers, and note that the koshas, the limbs of Patanjali's yoga, and these ideas of the external, the conscious awareness, the external body, the breath and the energy, the vital awareness, conscious mind and emotions, and then the subconscious, the imagery, the impressions, and eventually also the unconscious layers. Have these all as models of understanding how we can approach yoga therapy from this framework. And that leads to this understanding or idea that underneath the physical body, or in fact, the patterning that we get from the moment we're in the womb to the time that we're growing up, the different experiences we have as children, both positive, negative, neutral, our education, the work that we do, the food we eat, whether we're in nature environments or city environments, all these types of experiences, all these samskaras create an imprint on the deep unconscious and subconscious layers of our mind. And if we don't deal with those roots, then, as I said, we're going to continue to have those imbalances and challenges. So this is, keep all this in mind as we begin to move now through the stages of the Ashtanga yoga. We begin with yamas and niyamas. in yoga therapy. And we can use these as an understanding, a way to a framework that allows us to look at those roots. So we just looked at the idea of samskaras, the roots which are in the unconscious mind. And these imbalances manifest and create blocks at the different levels of physical, mental, and emotional bodies. And it also has a relationship to how we show up in the world, whether we're present, whether we kind of go into freeze states or fight states, or we get stuck in some patterned way of emotion, mind, etc. And so we can use these yamas and niyamas, and they're the beginning steps of yoga therapy, to begin to analyze and begin to know ourselves better. And I won't go into depth because many of you are likely have already know about the yamas and niyamas, but in brief, we can look at ahimsa, non-violence, and not just this idea of not killing any animal, but it's also really observing, like, what is, what type of thoughts and words and deeds and violence in the way we treat each other and in the way we treat ourselves. Because if we are having violent thoughts, or if we are treating others in our life that in a way that is lacking in balance or kindness, it is going to create a ripple effect, and that then will manifest in our experiences. And so from a yoga therapy point of view, all these layers have to be dealt with, you could say. Satya, truthfulness, and that's living by dharma, or that natural law of truth, but it's also about being truthful with ourselves. And I think that in some ways is the most important. And when we're, again, if we're not able to look at the deeper patterns, if we don't see how we act, think, speak, then it's very difficult to change. What we can't see, we can't change. So that looking inwards, and particularly having truth with ourselves, is a very important point or aspect of working with ourselves and working with clients from a therapeutic point of view. Honesty or non-stealing. So, I mean, in this case, we might be talking more about aspects that are in our external environment, or not stealing thoughts, things off the internet, all of this, because when we do these things, it creates an inner wave. It creates that disharmony inside, which will manifest at the physical level as an imbalance, will manifest in the pranic or energy body as an imbalance, and influence whether or not we'll be able to go into the more subtle stages of the 8-limbed yogic path. Asteya, so that's asteya, brahmacharya. And often people speak about that as abstinence. I think in modern days, we could maybe think of it more like the right use of our senses and our sensuality and consciousness, establishing ourselves in higher consciousness as we interact. And again, if we are misusing this energy of our own self, it will create an imbalance. So from a yoga therapy point of view, it's about how do we show up in the world? How do we interact? And this self-honesty and this understanding of ourself is really important to our overall healing, you could say, or our overall balance in life. A parigraha, so non-possessiveness, and that's really a result of non-attachment. If we're attached to both things, items, ideas, different, wanting to have an experience, again, attached even to an idea of how my health might look, these attachments can block the flow of energy. They can create an imbalance. So these aspects of yama, meaning yam, control, and we're aiming to kind of self-control is one way to say, but I think it's more like direct our energy, work with these qualities within ourselves, because when we have, aspects of truth and honesty and establishing more and higher consciousness, then that is going to filter down, you could say, to the other layers, the other koshas, and vice versa. Okay, I hope you're with me. Other aspects is the internal codes, the niyama. And so these are the first two aspects. Yama and niyama are the first two aspects of the yogic path of Patanjali. And the niyamas, these internal codes, are like cleanliness. Again, this is at the different levels. So environment, the environment we live, work in, interact within our own body. So from a yoga therapy point of view, if we are taking in a lot of toxins, if the mind is also toxic, then we are going to be creating, so it's both internal and external. And if we don't have that saucha, that cleanliness, then the toxins will influence our health. The toxins will influence our ability to go deeper into the yogic practices, because we won't be able to sit still. We won't have the ability to concentrate, or even the body mightn't be able to open, so then we can be carrying inflammation and joint pain and this type of thing. And that very much comes back to the toxins both in the body and the toxic mind, which stress and negativity create a very toxic mind. So thinking about saucha, cleanliness, santosha, contentment, and that really is that sense of living with simplicity and joy and gratitude. And being appreciative of what we do have, and instead of grasping all the time for more or something different. And again, these codes, if we understand them and we apply them for ourselves or our students or the people that we're working with in therapy, they can support us and them to find a different way to show up in life. Tapas, heat, austerities. And I think from a really practical point of view, it's really about resilience. So with that little bit of self-discipline and willpower and self-awareness, we begin to learn how to control the unconscious impulses, overcome the negative patterning, to be able to work with our samskaras. So it doesn't mean that the imprints, the patterning, the society, the education goes away, but we learn how to have the ability to redirect that and not allow it to influence us in the same way. Self-study, swadhyaya. If we don't understand ourselves, if we don't have some knowledge of ourselves or give our students and our clients that ability to self-reflect, then again, those unconscious patterns will continue to create imbalances, which is going to show up at the physical level, the pranic energetic level, the mental level, and so on and so forth. And Ishwara Pranidhan is really, it's an outcome of the other yamas and niyamas, so that surrender to higher power. But if we can flow, if we can let go and be more in the present moment and offer our actions in life to something with a higher purpose, then again, it's an inspiration that allows us to be able to manage what might happen at the different levels of physical, mental, emotional. Yamas and niyamas being the first two aspects of Patanjali's yogic path. This one really I put here because the whole of Ashtanga yoga path, these 8 limbs, is really about retraining our brain. So just putting that into modern language. And neurons that fire together wire together, as Donald Hebb has said. And what we're trying to do from a yogic perspective is to be able to lift ourselves out of the unconscious patterning. And the unconscious patterning is what we do most of the time. And so when we can raise our awareness, when we can kind of begin to gradually have a different perspective and use techniques and tools, we can retrain our brains so that we make new pathways, rather than, for example, a negative way of being, or maybe an imbalance that shows up in our physical body being the dominant kind of pathway. We can start to do something differently, or think differently, or use our practices to retrain the brain. And I think this becomes, when we start to come into these next steps or stages of the Ashtanga pathway, we can understand how that repetitive and regular practice, the abhyasa, the regular long-term practice, can support us to retrain the brain and begin to open up new highways, new pathways of positive ways to move through life. From that physical point of view, so traditionally asana, actually in Patanjali's pathway is about learning how to sit for a long period of time in a position that would allow us, or be in a posture for a long period of time that would allow us to get into the other states of experience where our pranas flow, where we can gradually withdraw from the experience of the sense inputs and come into a meditative state. However, the reality is we are carrying toxins, and our clients are carrying toxins. And so, and there's a lot of stress, which we've spoken about at the very beginning, which creates inflammation in the body. And when there's inflammation in the body, that will show up as stiffness, imbalance. The nervous system also is influenced by stress. And many, as I said, many of the kind of imbalances that we have to deal with in our day-to-day life really come back to these deeper roots. So with the asana in modern day times, often it's used more from that physical point of view of purifying, strengthening, creating flexibility, creating more balance in the nervous system, flushing out the organs, the blood, the lymph, and purifying. So there's that aspect, but also from a mental state, it's about learning to see our mind in front of a posture. And you can even think of that in life. It's like often when we show up in life, it's about how we are from a mental state, a mental posture point of view, whether we're balanced or imbalanced. And we can apply this idea of being steady and still from a physical asana point of view, also to how it influences the mind. And again, remember that we can't separate out these different koshas or these different layers. If there's an influence on one, it's going to transmit through all of them. So from this actual limb or this stage of the pathway, we're working with both the physical layer, but also the mental layer. So looking at our resistance, the dislikes, our attachments. Often people get attached to a certain practice or dislike one or resist one. So learning what that message, the messages of the body have to tell us, because when we can read those messages, we can, in a way, become almost our own therapist. I'm not saying that we shouldn't also reach out when there's a need, but we can learn so much from our own self by actually just looking in and learning to read the signs of our body, learning to know the difference between extending our capacities slightly to walk the edge and strengthen our ability, but not to the point of pain or injury, or how to adjust for pain and injury. So this is, you can say, also a more modern way of thinking about asana and yoga therapy compared to the traditional, Patanjali's traditional pathway, but in a way that's first. We have to purify, and we have to learn how to manage the mind a little bit so we can apply it to the next stage of the pathway. Next stage is pranayama. So we're still working with the external aspects of yoga therapy here and of Patanjali's pathway. The first 4 steps are called the external or Bahir path, or Bahir yoga, so the external, outside yoga. And pranayama can be interpreted in 2 ways. So you've got pranayama, and remember from the yamas and niyamas, yamas translating like control. So this is about learning to control the vital energy, the prana, which is more subtle. So we have our physical body, as we spoke about, but underlying the physical body is electricity, which is, if we're not plugged in, this body is just a corpse. It's the prana, actually, which allows for movement of the physical body. It's the prana which allows the mind to operate. So prana is vital for life, but also in our experience of moving through the layers of who we are, so that we can become more optimal human beings at all the different levels. So learning to manage or control our prana is one translation of pranayama. And the second is pranayama, when you add the A to this, this is about liberating and expanding. Whenever there's an imbalance in the physical body or even in the mental body, the prana begins to get constricted and contracted. And if we even go into the more subtle layers of where the root patterns and the deeper unconscious patterns and even universal shared patterns exist, if anytime those are dominant, they will block or have the prana moving in a particular loop, you could say, like a mind loop, or the physical aspect of being condensed and contracted in a particular area. And so through both the asana, but then also very specifically the pranayama, we're both aiming to learn to control the prana as well as to liberate and expand it. And this is where we can gain so much health, and very applicable into yoga therapy. And just from a really basic point of view, the emotions, when the breath changes, the emotion, it has an influence on the emotions and vice versa. If we have an emotional state, for example, if I get angry, then my breath is going to become fast and less ability or less prana there. So the breath is also a bridge. It's a bridge between the body and the mind. It's a way of both influencing the body and having it feel more activated, and also a way of activating or calming the mind. And as we become aware of breathing patterns, we change the chemical and neural patterns. And again, from this yoga therapy point of view, just we can do for ourselves and for others to help support coming into relaxation response. So diaphragmatic breathing, just which is a base, it's not even a proper pranayama, it's more of like a pre-pranayama, but that in and of itself is very valid and very important yoga therapy practice. And diaphragmatic breath is doing so many things, improving oxygenation, digestive, metabolic, and excretory functions. And keep in mind that when we move the diaphragm, we're actually massaging all the inner organs, and we're also influencing the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is the fastest way to the relaxation response, and it emanates from the brain, and it comes down through the throat into all the chest. It's the biggest nerve in the body. Vagus, meaning that vagal, it wanders. So it wanders throughout the body, comes into the chest, into the abdomen. When the abdomen moves up and down in yogic breath, and you're using the diaphragm for that motion, you are actually activating and toning the vagus nerve. And this enhances relaxation response. And relaxation response has so many vital, important influences on our body, helps with reducing inflammation, brings us into that rest and digest state. So the digestion becomes better. It helps us to be able to be more clear and think more, in a balanced way. And all of this is preliminary to any of the higher states of yoga, or even the higher states of pranayama. Also, you of course have classical pranayamas, and here from a more classical point of view, we're really working on releasing the pranic blocks, also working on, I just wanted to bring attention to that point, that the classical pranayams, you can use them very specifically in yoga therapy, because you can either work with the heating ones like Vastrika, Kapalbhati, which activate. So for example, if there's more of a depressive quality or contracted, condensed, or low digestive fire, then that heating can be useful. Of course, it's individual, so know that there's no what everything I'm saying would need to be individualized for the person or for yourself if you're working with yourself. Cooling pranayamas. So that's, when there's too much heat in the body, when there's too much anger, too much activation, then we're wanting to cool, or maybe too much heat in the environment, creating an imbalance. Balancing pranayams like Nadi Shodhan, which is good for most people and creates that balance of the Ida and Pingala nadis, or the left and right sides of the brain, the internal and external aspects of experience. So here we're working with balancing, which again is a prerequisite for any of the other limbs of Ashtanga yoga. Calming practices also. So we've got in the classical pranayam, we go, you could say we go straight through from pranayama at the very basic level of learning how to balance our breath, learning how to be more conscious again with our breath patterns, which a majority of people aren't even aware that they breathe and aren't aware that they can control the breath. And yet this bridge between the body and mind, and between the internal and external, which is our breath, allows us, it's the only autonomic kind of experience, being automatically driven by the nervous system, by the brain, that we also have the capacity to shift and change at will. So it's a very, very powerful tool that we have in our kit from a yoga therapy point of view, to be able to really influence different experiences, emotions, chemicals, neurological patterns, digestion, so many systems in the body. Keeping that in mind, we now move on to pratyahara. And this is where we come into the line between the external and external. So this is where we move into the antar. The bahir path is the outer and the antar is the inner. So these are the inner practices. And as I said, everything's interconnected. So we can't just treat the body, or we can't just treat the mind without having a balanced view and looking at these interconnected layers. And pratyahara translates as that idea of the withdrawal of the mind from the senses. And earlier I showed you that slide where the senses are constantly connected to the external world, and we're bringing in all sorts of different inputs all the time, through the hands, through the eyes, the mouth, the smell, the ears, taste. And as those inputs come in, they continue to stimulate the mind. They bring up the samskaras, the memories from the memory bank. They push and pull us into actions, into maybe shutting down within ourselves if we've had a traumatic experience, for example, as a child. Then that gets replayed over and over due to maybe being exposed again to a similar sense experience. And then we go into that traumatic pattern, which might be a fight pattern, a freeze pattern, a run pattern, fight, flight, freeze. So those are often patterns that get repeated, which is based on often trauma that has been we've been exposed to at a very young age. And so we need to learn how to control these senses, and we have to live with the world of senses, because we are a body and we have these senses, and they're useful. They help us to navigate the world. But on the other hand, we need to be the master of them. So pratyahara is about learning to be the master, and it's the process whereby the mind and the mental awareness are disassociated from the channels. And so we learn to do this at will, that we can disengage with the external stimuli so that the full force of our awareness can be turned within. And it doesn't mean we stay disengaged, but it's that ability. At the classical way of thinking about it is the turtle or the tortoise, and the 4 legs and the head represent the 5 senses. And when we want to pull in, then we pull the legs and the head in, and then when we need to come back out and extend ourselves, the head and the legs go back out so we can act in the world. So pratyahara is that in-between state. It's there's many practices of pratyahara. Yoga nidra is one of the most wonderful. It's pratyahara as a starting place. It also has other benefits. It's not only a pratyahara practice, but it begins as a pratyahara practice, even shavasana, and we can get some benefits through asana and pranayama. We can also have some aspects of pratyahara beginning to be experienced. And when we have that rest from the senses, when we have that rest from the input, it allows for so much more harmony in our nervous system. And again, stress is one of the keys that is creating imbalances at all levels: physical, mental, emotional, relationship difficulties, societal difficulties. So if we can learn the techniques to draw ourselves in and harmonize ourselves, then when we come back out, we can be more balanced to live our lives in a more positive and successful way, you could say. And so pratyahara is a very important practice, especially in this day and age. And we often do this by first extending the mind out to experience the senses, like to hear the sounds, to taste, smell, so that saturation occurs, and then detachment. And I'll come to this idea of observing or witnessing next. And that's very important. So this quality of witnessing is what allows us to really understand ourselves from a different point of view, and to use the techniques in this 8-limb path to find more health and whole, a holistic self that is more balanced. So we extend, we witness whatever is we're experiencing, whatever sense input there is, and that creates an automatic turning in, so that we begin to be able to operate from that different perspective. And the witness, and that's key through all of these limbs, to be frank, but as we come into the internal aspects of the Ashtanga yoga path, that's where we really meet this idea of witnessing, mindfulness, being present in a different way. And that's the ability to stand back and watch the reactions, observe them. So, and from a yoga therapy point of view, this is so key. Again, if we're not honest with ourselves, if we can't even see what's going on, if we can't see the reactions and actions, how are we going to do something different? So training ourselves and our clients in the witnessing is very important. And it's this ability to choose to act rather than react. So we might feel an emotion come up, and we might choose to come to our abdominal breath, to our diaphragmatic breath, which will help us to stay calm. Or maybe we choose to direct that energy that arises, or that mental state, into a different way. Or maybe we see a reaction and we think, instead of moving into that reaction, I'm going to practice gratitude. And in this way, we change our karma. We change the experience that we're having, which changes our health and changes our experience of life. And so it's that being the observer rather than the participant in one's thoughts and actions. And it's like watching a movie. When you're watching a movie, you know that it's a movie, and if it gets scary, you can say, oh, it's just a Bollywood film. So, I'm not going to get my heart rates going up, but let me take a deep breath. If we could do this in front of our own life, then we would be so much more healthy and balanced. So here we're learning to be that observer, be impartial, objective, non-judgmental, looking at the bigger picture and working on developing equanimity in front of whatever experience of life there is. Whatever is thrown at us, to learn to be in our center in front of it. So this witnessing, it's behind all the limbs, but particularly becomes very important when we're beginning to work with pratyahara and also dharana. And often I love this, because this photo here, because he's at work and he's thinking about his golf, and then he goes to golf and he's thinking about his work. And often this is how it is. We're not present. We're not concentrated in what we're doing. We go into our default mode, or we go into the patterned way of being, and we're living in automatic. And those unconscious patterns, those samskaras that we spoke about at the beginning, the scientists like Bruce Lipton and other scientists who've been studying this speak about how 95% of our day-to-day experience is being driven by the unconscious patterning, which is set by about the age of 8. And so here we are living our lives with about 95% of it actually just being a hard drive running over and over. It's it's like a computer program. And so from a yogic perspective, we are wanting to know ourselves, be able to get out of that unconscious patterning, learn to direct ourselves as at will again. So dharana is that concentration, and from concentration comes dhyan, comes the meditative state. And I think most of our work really from a yoga therapy point of view is working with those first 6 stages, because dharana and dhyan, concentration is good to work with, because, and I'll show a slide in a moment that talks about the benefits when we can focus. But dhyan is not something we can practice meditation techniques, and they have so many benefits from a yoga therapy point of view, but it's not something that you can just grasp out of the thin air. Dhyan is a state of experience which comes when we get a flow of concentration, dharana. So we can do the practices of meditation because they have a beneficial influence on our stress levels, on our ability to concentrate, on so many other aspects of our experience, which from a yoga therapy perspective can be very beneficial for our health, and particularly mental health. And physical health, actually. But do know that dhyan is actually a state of experience. I wanted to just show a few of these studies just to show the cognitive benefits of meditation practice. So and of course there's different types of meditation practices. So, but some of the types of experiences we can influence, for example, is the flexible cognitive strategies. And so these are all studies that have been done not too long ago. And it shows you that by working with these techniques, we can, for example, become more flexible, more ability to, think outside the box. And this is very important when we're working from yoga therapy, because it's when we get stuck in a particular way of being that we often create an imbalance. So these kind of flexible cognitive strategies, less influenced by interference. So again, that idea of becoming more concentrated, reduced emotional interference, so not as reactive, optimal arousal, self-regulation, ability to actually regulate our own nervous system, our own arousal. And again, that relates back to both pratyahara, the withdrawing from the sense inputs, and also the ability to concentrate. So these are just a few of the studies. There's hundreds and hundreds of them nowadays, and more information coming out on the power and benefits of meditation. But just to techniques, just to bring that into that idea of how we could use it from a yoga therapy perspective. So many ways to do that. Okay, so meditation practice, we can see here, it leads us to self-awareness, which leads us to more regulation, which eventually from a basic level helps us perhaps transcend some of the patterning that may be disturbing us at the different levels of body, mind, emotion, and prana, and eventually allows us to transcend even to that state where we can come to the final step or stage of Patanjali's pathway, which is that samadhi. But I feel like that's probably more in the future, and what we can work with are the earlier stages. That's where we can have influence on our day-to-day life and on health as we show up in today's world. And all of these practices that I've been speaking about lead us to this resilience, our ability to ride the waves. So through the different the stages of Patanjali's yoga, we learn to ride the waves of life, we get more resilience, and we have tools to deal with the layers of ourselves as they show up, the imbalances, the at the levels, the different koshas, the body, the mind, the prana, and the more subtle states. Also dealing with our subconscious and unconscious layers and the samskaras, which continue to influence us and create new karmas. So through these 8 stages of Patanjali's path, we are able to balance ourselves a lot more efficiently, but also we get more resilience and ability to ride the waves of life. So that is my slideshow that I wanted to share with you. And I'll just pause my share now, or I'll take it. So thank you very much for listening. And I believe there is some questions, perhaps.
Thank you so much. It was a great session because it included philosophy, then science, neuroscience, and at last we had a research-based approach, which we should look forward as a medical students to understand how yoga is helpful in the medicine as well as in therapy.
Yes.
So my first question would be that how would you define that spiritual awakening is different than any mental illness? Because few doctors might understand that spiritual awakening is some kind of schizophrenic disorders or some kind of psychosis. So there should be a differentiation, that is a very thin line difference. So how we should understand in our practice that which is spiritual awakening and which is psychosis?
Ooh, that's quite a I can't give you a specific answer, but what I would say is that with spiritual awakening, there is that consciousness is there. And often what I've seen when there's a mental imbalance, it's occurring without consciousness, and there can be a confusion actually, because sometimes these deeper layers can come to the surface too quickly, and without guidance and without kind of the right practice, that can create actually a type of psychosis. So I feel like as a very specific thing, it would be quite individual to each person as they show up. So I don't feel like I can to give a very proper answer, but what I would say is that any of the practices of yoga should be given, yoga and meditation, and these things should be given in such a way that it is a gradual approach and that is very grounded. And that's what I hope I also could impart here, that this is not just about eventually we are aiming for spiritual awakening. That's the pathway of Ashtanga yoga. But the reality is we have to deal with all the layers of experience that we're having. We have to deal with the imbalances in the physical body. We have to deal with the mind, definitely, that does get stuck in these loops and does get distracted, or kind of the nervous system, which is creating particular loops of experience that could be based, for example, on the earlier trauma that I was speaking about. And so I feel like we have to just go step by step in yogic practice and meditation practice, and not actually, in some ways, the transcendence or the samadhi is a result of all the other steps. And from the medical point of view, I feel like it's very individual. So I don't feel that I can give a proper answer just here today.
No,
Maybe we could do another session.
It's a very good answer. Why? Because
Okay.
we have seen patients who had suffered from psychosis due to the process, like there was no guru to teach the Ashtanga yoga, there was no guru to teach meditation, and that's why they went to psychosis. So that's why I wanted to understand from your answer, and that was very clear from you.
Yes,
And
yes.
yeah,
I think it's very true that we need guidance, and I feel like like being a doctor, you're not going to just pick up the book and then start to treat people. It's something that over years you have developed this, and it's the same with the yogic practices, that it's a lifetime of practice, and we need proper guidance. And really the basic practices are very much what's needed in this day and age. Yeah, like I said, the diaphragmatic breathing, which influences the nervous system and our ability to come into relax and recharge and to lessen the inflammation in the body. These types of practices are what we need beyond or more so for the majority of people. There are people who the transcendence and working for spiritual growth or towards spiritual growth is very important. So I don't say not to have that focus, but let's start at the right stage. One of my teachers, Swami Satyasangananda, said, before we reach for enlightenment, let's get through the kindergarten. And kindergarten is learning to breathe right and learning to keep the body more balanced. Yeah.
That's very good. And my next question would be that there are 5 layers of consciousness. We say the Panch Kosha awareness or Panch Kosha philosophy. Do an individual use all Panch Kosha, or they stuck to the first or second layer? Because, or how we should understand that these 5 layers, we have to grow from the down or from the up. There are so many confusion. If you can give a somewhat philosophical answer for that.
So I think the thing is we are able to relate more to particularly the first 3 layers. So the physical body, Annamaya Kosh, the mental Manomaya, the Pranamaya, the energy layer, because we are having experience in those layers that is more accessible. Like we might, we can feel our body, we can touch it, we can paint it, we feel it when it has pain, balance, imbalance. So in a way that's accessible, and we have to start there. Also, we can sometimes, particularly if we begin to do meditation practices or some of these practices I've mentioned, we can start to notice like, okay, my thoughts are stuck in a particular way of being, or I've gotten, I'm feeling an emotional state, I'm feeling angry or, contracted. And so we can start to recognize patterns at the layers of the first 3 layers of the mind, the body, and the prana. And they're all interconnected. And also the deeper seeds, the unconscious roots are also related to this Vijnana Maya Kosh. So there is an interconnection, but those express themselves through the body, mind, and prana. So I think at a very practical level, it's really about looking or dealing more with those layers. Again, it's about, rather than trying to get to the university level before going through school and through kindergarten and all the other classes, we start with where we can access, and we can access the body, we can access the states of mind, we can access, we can actually influence the prana through the breath and through our activities, through what we eat, through how we show up. And that will allow us to experience the intuitive, that because when those 3 are aligned, then that higher mind, the intuitive layer guides us. It's there, they're all there, they're within us. It's just that when we're stuck in the veils of Maya, the veils of the illusions, you could say, which we all are. As I said, only 95% of our experience is conscious. 95% is being driven by those unconscious patterns. So until and unless we can start to manage the mind, learn how to direct the prana, be more the master of our own body, and create that balanced body, also containing the nervous system. So that's a very big part of body. When we think of that, it's both the physical body as well as relationship to pranic body through the electricity that moves through the nervous system. And so those are the first kind of aspects that we have access to more easily. And as we balance those, then there will be a natural understanding and relationship that develops with those more subtle layers of experience. Is that?
Thank you so much, because it makes sense, and it makes the relativity towards the practical experience of science rather than the philosophy of science. And my next question would be, maybe I'm asking more questions, but there are so many, but I'm concising myself. The next question would be the word anhata you
Mm.
have used as a yoga retreat in your center in the New Zealand. I
Yes.
wanted to understand what was the conscious behind this word to be chosen to the center created by you as a co-founder.
Yes. Well, I don't know. It's one of those things that it came to us really, but it translates as the heart center when we look at from the framework of the chakras or the energy centers, which is a whole nother talk. So maybe we can do another one in the future. I'd love to share from the yoga psychology point of view about the chakras. Would be very interesting for people. But this chakra is about the Anahat chakra, the center, the heart space is the transition actually into spiritual life. And so here in the West, this felt appropriate because you have so much of the worldly life, and this place, Anahata, we've developed it as a stepping stone to kind of transform and come into higher expressions of who we are and to begin to move into spiritual life. And Anahat chakra, some of the practices are like seva, selfless service. So that's one of the things one of the practices we do here is selfless service and aiming to be of support to those in need. We work a lot with music and creativity and kirtan, because that is also just a wonderful way to redirect the energy that might get caught in the mind or get stuck in the body. And we use the kirtan to redirect the emotions. Swami Naranjan speaks about the path of bhakti yoga, not as the path of devotion, although that's the ultimate aim or kind of outcome, but on the way there we have to manage our emotions. And so kirtan and some of these bhakti practices, which are also connected to the Anahat chakra, we use to redirect emotion and learn to manage emotion and understand ourselves from that point of view. So I guess that it came to us, I would say. The other one of the other co-founders, there was 4 co-founders, but one of the other ones, or 5 actually, but he had lived in India for 16 years at the time when we bought this place and began it as a retreat center and as a ashram, a Western environment. He had come from India, and it just came as a natural expression of what our purpose was here, to work from the heart, to serve from the heart, and to activate that serve, love, give. So yes.
Thank you so much, because it gives a lot of impression towards the motto, towards what you are serving in the country, in the Western culture, that how to propagate the yoga in the correct format, rather than propagating only philosophy would not help the individual, rather than therapy and science behind the yoga would help it.
Yes.
Yeah. So the
Beautiful.
last question of today's session, there are so many kinds of meditation, and when I go through your work, they talk about hatha yoga, yoga nidra. They are like basic meditation. You do not go for the higher level of meditations and all. So I want to understand, if any individual comes to you, how you think that this kind of meditation or this kind of techniques would be helpful for this individual, or it is same for everyone?
You know, the majority of people that I come across, and I do travel around the world, so I've been teaching all over India, Europe, United States, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. So I've met people from all around the world in different cultures, and I can say to you that the majority of people need to work with pratyahara type techniques, which yoga nidra begins as a pratyahara practice. And in fact, yoga nidra is a very deep and powerful transformative meditation technique that eventually can lead you all the way to the highest state of experience. But for most people, they're exhausted, their nervous system is out of balance. Many people, especially after this last few years of pandemic, have lost hope. Really a lot of challenges, and they just need to learn. They just need some time to rest, to draw in, so that they can re-nourish and fill up their battery bank of prana and inspiration. And I find Yoga Nidra very powerful for that. And the other practice that I use a lot from a meditation point of view is the Antramona, or inner silence. And that's about learning to witness. But you begin with witnessing the body and the senses, witnessing the breath, then you move to witnessing the mind and the different kind of expressions, also the emotions, and eventually being able to even draw up something that is a difficulty or a challenge, go to the roots of that, and then let it go and become less attached to it. And I find that in some ways, these two meditation practices are suitable for most people. But of course, from a yoga therapy point of view, I would be working with each individual. So for some people, I might give a japa jap because they want to work with the breath, or they have a natural affinity to the breath. And so that brings them a calm, and it also begins to harmonize their pranic system as well as help them concentrate. For some people, I might work with the chakras and give more of a chakra meditation. So I would definitely say it's not just the basic meditations, but the basic ones in and of themselves have so much power. And sometimes I feel we grasp too much for complicated things, or we maybe read the Vedic scriptures and we want to do some complicated meditation from those times, but the times that we're living in are different. They're unique, and people, the main difficulty people have is too much stimulation or inner kind of stress due to perhaps traumas in the past, like we spoke about with the samskaras, or expectations of parents, of family, society. And so there's a lot of inner expectations, which if we don't meet, then we can become disappointed or depressed. There's a lot of imbalance from the point of view of chemicals in the environment, chemicals in even medicines. And that can create imbalance in the whole body. So before we can go to these higher meditations and go to these higher states of experience, we have to deal with where we're at. And that's exhausted, stressed out, moved into so many different directions that there's no clarity of where I'm going in life. So first we have to manage those things, teach people how to breathe better, again, to remember that even they have breath, that they have a body, that if they attend to it, it will serve them, it will become their temple later in life. To remember that by managing their own minds with focus and right intent and positivity, that they can do anything in life. So again, it's that same idea that my teacher, Swami Satyasangananda, kept sharing. Like, first we start with where we're at, and most of us are in kindergarten when it comes to knowing ourselves. So we have to start there before we go to the university practices of meditation. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful session that you have given in the last 1 hour, 5 minutes. And
Wow.
then so I have taken a lot of time of yours. And second thing, I want to say that I have learned 3 things: that whenever you learn something which is real science, you always thanks to your guru. That everyone should do while they propagate any kind of philosophy or science throughout the world. And you have done that, and I have learned this thing, that whenever you go and speak about something, you should thank to your guru who have taught you these kind of techniques. Second, the philosophy is really connected with the science rather than only philosophy, because it sometimes in the modern view of world, it does not give that sense what we are actually looking forward. So these 2 things I really learned from your session today, and definitely this session would help many individuals to understand what Anahata Yoga Retreat gives and what are the things that they have to understand in terms of Patanjali's simple sutras of yoga.
Beautiful. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. It's been
Thank you.
such an honor to share with you today.
Yes.
Yeah.